Jonathan Walker was a man who always controlled his destiny. From nothing, he built a business empire, and over the years became one of the most powerful and influential men in Los Angeles. He had everything most people dream of: a devoted wife, a lovely daughter, and a life surrounded by luxury. But recently, this perfect life started to feel stagnant. Emily, his wife, was everything he thought he wanted. Strong, intelligent, and loyal, she had been by his side since the days when he was still struggling to make a name for himself in the market. Together, they built a solid and comfortable life. But in the past few months, something had changed in Jonathan. He could no longer ignore the unsettling feeling of monotony hovering over his marriage. His conversations with Emily were predictable, lacking the lightness or enthusiasm of before. She was always focused on the house or caring for Grace, their 3-year-old daughter, and seemed unaware that Jonathan was growing more distant. Then, Lauren appeared. Lauren was Grace's new nanny, hired after the previous one had to return to her hometown. In her early 20s, with blonde hair and an aura of freshness and lightness, Lauren was everything Emily no longer was. She had a spontaneity that fascinated Jonathan. No matter the time of day, Lauren always seemed full of energy and joy. She laughed loudly, played with Grace in a carefree manner, and her presence lit up the house in a way he couldn't ignore. Jonathan first realized how much he was affected by Lauren one afternoon when she was in the garden, running after Grace. Emily, as usual, was in the kitchen, preparing a dinner whose taste he could already predict. The same routine as always. He watched the nanny through the window, her laughter filling the air, and something inside him ignited. Why doesn't Emily laugh like that anymore? He wondered. Jonathan began to notice Emily more. Her mechanical gestures, her constant concern with keeping everything under control, her meticulous efforts to ensure he had a perfect life. All of this now irritated him. He found himself comparing how Emily dressed, always in formal, practical clothes, with how Lauren wore tight jeans and light, casual tops, always giving her a young, carefree look. And that carefree attitude attracted him in a way he would never admit out loud. One night, after dinner, Jonathan sat in the office with a glass of whiskey, thinking about how his life had become predictable. Emily, after cleaning the kitchen, went upstairs to the bedroom, as she did every night, to read a book before bed. Jonathan, however, couldn't get Lauren's image out of his head. The previous day, she had been in shorts and a loose t-shirt, dancing with Grace in the living room, her movements fluid and joyful, so different from Emily's rigid composure. Deep down, he knew Emily was the perfect woman for him, or at least he had always believed so. But the more he compared his wife to Lauren, the more he felt he was missing something essential. He began spending more time at home, using the excuse of wanting to spend more time with Grace. However, it was obvious to him that the real reason was Lauren. He felt more alive in her presence. There was an electricity in the air when she was around, something that made his heart beat faster. That same night, Jonathan went to the garden, where Lauren was sitting with Grace, telling stories under the stars. The scene was perfect. He approached slowly, listening to Grace's laughter as Lauren invented funny characters. Emily, as usual, had already retired. As he drew closer, Lauren looked up at him and smiled. It was a smile that made his stomach turn. Not with guilt. It was a smile of complicity, of something that was beginning to be built between them, even though no one had said a word. "You're good with kids," Jonathan commented, sitting next to her on the lawn. He tried to keep the tone casual, but felt his own nervousness creeping in. "Thanks. Grace is an amazing girl," Lauren replied, looking directly at him, her eyes shining in the garden's dim light. "She has a special energy. It's contagious." Jonathan smiled, but his mind was racing. He knew he should get up and go back inside, where his wife was waiting. But he stayed. He stayed longer than he should have, exchanging light conversations with Lauren, feeling lighter than he had in months. The night wore on, and when he finally went inside, he felt a mix of excitement and guilt. Excitement for something that had yet to be named. Guilt for something he knew was about to happen. In the days that followed, Jonathan began finding more excuses to be near Lauren. He asked trivial questions, offered help with Grace's tasks, and always stayed close while she was around. Emily focused on the domestic routine, seemed not to notice her husband's growing fascination with the nanny. But the distance between her and Jonathan was becoming an abyss. He now looked at her with an indifference that troubled him. Where was the vibrant woman he had met years ago? Had Emily changed, or was it he who no longer knew what he wanted? Each day, Lauren's smile enveloped him more. The way she laughed easily, how her presence brought a new energy to the house. Compared to that, Emily seemed almost invisible. She's too practical, Jonathan thought. Always so focused on keeping up appearances, on making sure everything is under control. Doesn't she see how unhappy I am? But what he didn't realize, or didn't want to admit, was that his discontent wasn't just in the marriage. Something inside him yearned for more. For danger, for excitement. And Lauren represented exactly that, the promise of something new, unexpected, and perhaps destructive. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. They won't understand. Comment pizza in the comments. Only those who read this far will get it. And let's continue with the story. Jonathan started to wonder if he had ever truly known the real Emily. At the beginning of their relationship, everything seemed perfect. They were partners, inseparable companions in the fight to build the empire he now commanded. Emily had always been the ideal wife, supporting his dreams with the same dedication with which she cared for Grace. But recently, he could only see her rigidity. Every movement of Emily's was meticulous, predictable, as if she were stuck in a never-ending routine. On the other hand, Lauren was pure spontaneity. There was a seductive carefreeness in her way of talking, moving, laughing. She was like a fresh breeze blowing through Jonathan's life, who, every day, felt more the weight of boredom. Gradually, he began to notice the little things. The way Lauren tossed her blonde hair to the side when laughing at something silly Grace did, or how her casual clothes always seemed to reveal more skin than necessary, catching his attention in a way that was impossible to ignore. Jonathan tried to convince himself that his feelings for Lauren were just a temporary distraction. After all, he was 40, and she was barely past 20. Still, the vibrant youth she exuded attracted him with an almost magnetic force. Every time he saw her, the comparison with Emily seemed inevitable. Emily, with her elegant clothes and formal posture, always careful and methodical. Lauren, on the other hand, seemed to have no limits, and this was something Jonathan didn't know he needed until now. One afternoon, Jonathan came home from work earlier than usual. As he entered through the front door, he immediately heard the laughter of Grace and Lauren coming from upstairs. Without announcing his arrival, he climbed the stairs slowly, curious to see what was happening. As he approached Grace's bedroom door, he saw the scene. Lauren was lying on the floor, with Grace laughing uncontrollably on her chest. Lauren was pretending to be a monster, playfully growling while Grace climbed over her in a battle of pure fun. Jonathan stood in the doorway watching, but it wasn't his daughter he was admiring. It was the way Lauren moved, the lightness in her laughter, the way her skin glowed under the soft room light. When Lauren finally noticed his presence, she smiled at him without getting up, with Grace still lying on her body. "Home early today," said Lauren in a casual tone, showing no sign of discomfort. "Yes, I had a break at work and decided to come home," replied Jonathan, not taking his eyes off her. "You two seem to be having fun." "We are. Grace gives me more work than a room full of kids," she said, laughing. There was something in the way she looked at him at that moment, a subtle but seductive confidence, as if she was fully aware of her own attraction to him. Jonathan felt a chill down his spine, as if he was playing with fire, but he couldn't resist. Lauren was the spark missing in his life, a promise of something more, something exciting. That night, during dinner, Jonathan couldn't get the scene out of his head. Emily sat across from him, so focused on the practical details of the day that she seemed oblivious to the growing distance between them. She was always concerned with Grace, the house, her responsibilities as a wife. He found himself observing the way she cut her food into small pieces, with calculated and efficient gestures. When Emily talked about the kitchen renovation, he realized how much that conversation bored him. "Lauren is great with Grace, isn't she?" Jonathan interrupted, abruptly changing the subject. Emily looked at him in surprise, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, she is excellent. Grace loves her. Yes, she seems to have a natural way with kids. I like how she manages to keep things light." Emily smiled, but her smile seemed empty, automatic. That's important. Grace needs someone to keep her energy occupied. Jonathan nodded, but in his mind, he was elsewhere. He began to imagine Lauren outside of her role as a nanny, what life would be like with someone like her. The laughter, the spontaneity, the freedom. Looking at Emily, he felt guilty for his thoughts, but he also couldn't stop. It was as if, suddenly, the life he had built with her was a golden cage. Comfortable, but without emotion. In the following weeks, Jonathan began to find excuses to spend more time at home. He told himself it was to spend more time with Grace, but deep down, he knew his true motivation was Lauren. One evening, while Emily was upstairs attending to household chores, he found Lauren in the living room, sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. Grace was already asleep, and the house was quiet. "Rough day?" Jonathan asked. Sitting next to her at a distance he felt was safe, but close enough to smell her sweet perfume. "Not really." Grace was a bit restless, but nothing out of the ordinary, she replied, smiling as she closed the magazine and placed it on the coffee table. "You really do a great job with her. The house feels more cheerful since you arrived." Lauren looked at him, her eyes sparkling, and for a second, the silence between them stretched. "I like being here. You have an amazing family." "I don't know about that," Jonathan said with a nervous laugh, his eyes fixed on hers. "Sometimes I feel like everything is a bit out of place." "Out of place? What do you mean?" Lauren asked, leaning slightly toward him. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, realizing how close he was to crossing a line. But at that moment, he didn't care. "Sometimes I think things could be different. I wonder if things could be more exciting, more free, you know?" Lauren watched him closely, and Jonathan could feel the tension growing between them. "Sometimes, life is about seeking what truly makes us happy," she responded softly, her voice almost a whisper. Jonathan remained silent, but the meaning of that conversation hung in the air. Something had changed between them. An invisible barrier had been broken, and for the first time, Jonathan knew for sure that his life would never be the same. Jonathan was increasingly consumed by Lauren. Every day that passed, he felt the tension between them grow. Moments that once seemed harmless now had a new weight, charged with electricity. He knew he was on the brink of something irreversible, but it was as if he was being pulled by a force he couldn't control. The desire for Lauren became impossible to ignore, as did the growing dissatisfaction with Emily. It was a Saturday night, and Emily was in the bedroom, reading as usual. Jonathan descended the stairs to the living room, where Lauren was finishing tidying up Grace's toys. He approached her with a casual smile, but inside, his heart was beating faster. Lauren turned around, her eyes sparkling as if she already knew he would come. "Don't you ever get tired?" he asked, trying to sound relaxed. Lauren gave a teasing smile. "It's part of the job," she replied, folding a blanket and placing it on the sofa. "Besides, Grace keeps me always on the move." Jonathan stepped a little closer, the sweet smell of her perfume invading his senses. He knew he was testing the limits. "And who keeps you on the move?" he asked, his voice lower than he intended. Silence stretched between them. Lauren looked directly at him, and Jonathan felt the tension in the air intensify. This was no longer an innocent game. This moment carried something dangerous, something he didn't know if he could stop. Lauren held his gaze, not looking away. "Maybe you can tell me," she replied, her voice soft but full of provocation. Jonathan felt a shiver run down his spine. He was about to say something, but at that moment, Emily's voice echoed down the hall. "Jonathan, have you seen my book?" Her voice was distant, but it abruptly brought Jonathan back to reality. He quickly stepped away, feeling a wave of guilt mixed with frustration. "I'll look for it," he shouted, trying to sound normal. When Lauren turned back to him, her eyes still sparkled, as if challenging him to continue what he had started. Jonathan hurried up the stairs, his heart racing, while Emily's voice called him back to the present he was desperate to escape. When he entered the bedroom, he saw Emily lying on the bed, reading glasses on her face, and a relaxed expression. She didn't even seem to notice Jonathan's internal turmoil. How could she not see it? How could she not sense the growing chasm between them? To her, it seemed everything was still in place, as if nothing had changed since the days they were young and in love. "It's on your nightstand," he said, picking up the book and handing it to her with a forced smile. "Thanks," Emily replied, smiling back, but there was something distant in that smile. "Are you okay, Jonathan? You seem so restless lately." Jonathan hesitated. This was his chance to tell the truth, to open up, to confess what was eating away at his heart. But instead, he shook his head and shrugged. "Just a lot of work." Emily sighed, closing the book and turning to him. "You know you can talk to me, right? I know we haven't spent much time together, but if there's something you need to say." Jonathan looked at her, feeling the weight of guilt grow in his chest. But all he could manage was a vague nod. "It's okay, Em. I'm just tired." She smiled, reaching out to touch his hand, but her touch felt distant, cold. He no longer felt the same connection. As his mind wandered, an image of Lauren involuntarily appeared. Her smile, her carefree manner, the way she made his heart race with just a glance. In the following days, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about that moment with Lauren in the living room. He knew he had crossed an invisible line, and although he had pulled back at the last moment, the desire continued to burn inside him. He started looking for more opportunities to be alone with Lauren, feeling that something inevitable was about to happen. Let's play a prank on those who only read the comments? They won't understand. Comment Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who get this far will understand. And let's continue with the story. One afternoon, Emily suggested they take a weekend trip together. Just the three of us. We could get out of town, spend some time alone. "I think it would be good for all of us," she said, her tone hopeful. Jonathan barely heard her words. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about Lauren. The idea of spending an entire weekend with Emily and Grace without Lauren around seemed suffocating. "Maybe later," he replied, dragging his voice. "I'm swamped with work right now." Emily seemed disheartened but nodded. "Of course, I understand. I just thought it might help us." Jonathan realized Emily's suggestion was a desperate effort to save their marriage, but he was already too emotionally distant to care. Increasingly, he saw Emily as a responsibility, a reminder of the past he wanted to leave behind. Lauren was the future. Exciting, unknown, a promise of something he felt was missing in his life. It was on a quiet afternoon that everything finally fell apart. Jonathan was at home, working in his office while Emily was out shopping. Lauren was with Grace in the garden, and their laughter echoed through the house. Jonathan could no longer concentrate on his work. Something inside him pushed him out of that office to where Lauren was. He went down the stairs and out to the garden, where he found Lauren lying on the grass while Grace ran around, playing with a ball. When Jonathan saw her, Lauren smiled, that smile that always seemed full of unspoken promises. "Grace is full of energy today," she said casually as he approached. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He knelt beside her, watching Grace play, but his mind was elsewhere. The warmth of the sun on his face, but it was the warmth of Lauren's presence next to him that he felt more intensely. "Have you ever thought," Jonathan began, not really knowing where his words would lead him, "about how things could be different?" Lauren turned to him, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Different how?" Jonathan was silent for a moment, trying to formulate his thoughts. How life would be if it wasn't like this, if it was more free, more exciting. Lauren watched him closely, not responding immediately. There was a silent understanding between them, a thin line about to be crossed. "Maybe you should find out," she said, her voice soft but filled with provocation. And at that moment, Jonathan knew. He knew his marriage was over. He had already made his choice, even if he hadn't said it out loud. The desire for Lauren was no longer something he could ignore or disguise. And what was left of his relationship with Emily was just waiting to collapse. Jonathan stood up slowly, not taking his eyes off Lauren. "Maybe I should," he murmured, his words filled with a dark certainty. Jonathan never thought that betraying Emily could be so easy. What started as a fascination turned into an almost impulsive decision, but one that felt inevitable. After weeks of poorly disguised tensions and furtive encounters, the relationship with Lauren finally crossed the line. He hadn't said the word love yet, maybe because he knew it would be a lie. But the desire he felt for her was undeniable and overwhelming. The first time they were alone, without Grace around and with Emily away from home, it was as if the air around them had suddenly changed. Jonathan knew what was about to happen. He approached Lauren in the living room, the atmosphere charged with expectations. When their eyes met, neither of them said a word. It was as if, in that moment, all words had already been said, with no need for explanation. Jonathan kissed her, and it was like a release for him. All the frustration accumulated over the past months, the weight of a marriage that no longer brought him joy, all seemed to disappear when he was with her. In that instant, Jonathan was certain that his life was finally changing for the better. The days that followed were an intoxicating mix of desire, secrets, and lies. Jonathan and Lauren were living a kind of clandestine honeymoon, where every moment together was stolen, every touch was forbidden, and this made everything even more exciting. He began working less and coming up with more excuses for Emily, claiming last-minute meetings or long days at the office. What he was really doing was spending entire afternoons with Lauren. The afternoons in the garden, which were once dedicated to Grace, turned into moments just for them, always taking advantage of Emily's absences. Lauren always seemed to be waiting for him, smiling conspiratorially, knowing that their game had spiraled out of control. And Jonathan let himself be carried away. Life with Lauren was very different from what Jonathan was used to with Emily. With Lauren, there were no demands. There were no renovation plans or boring dinners. Instead, there was spontaneity. Lauren made him laugh in a way he hadn't experienced in years. It was as if she had given him back a part of himself that he had lost over the years. One afternoon, as they lay on the couch after another secret meeting, Jonathan turned to Lauren, smiling, with his arm around her. "You make me feel young again," he said, almost not believing he was saying it out loud. "That's good," she replied, playing with the collar of his shirt. "You deserve to be happy." Jonathan watched her for a moment, feeling a wave of euphoria as he realized he was finally doing something for himself. Not for Emily, not for Grace, but for him. That relationship with Lauren was what he believed his life should be. Free, unencumbered, without the weight of routine. But it wasn't all that simple. Despite the exhilaration of the meetings, something bothered Jonathan when he wasn't with Lauren. It was Emily's look. Although she didn't know what was happening, she seemed increasingly perceptive to the emotional distance between them. She tried to keep up appearances, but her attempts to reconnect began to seem desperate. One night during dinner, Emily commented almost casually, "I feel like we're drifting apart, Jonathan. I don't know. It seems like you're always somewhere else." Jonathan froze. He hadn't expected her to bring it up so directly. With his fork suspended in the air, he looked at her and tried to stay composed. "It's nothing, Em. Just work and other worries, everything," but she didn't seem convinced. "I know you, Jonathan. It's not just work." Emily's tone was soft, but there was an underlying sadness. She watched him as if trying to understand where everything had started to fall apart. Jonathan sighed, struggling to find a way to reassure her without revealing the truth. "Maybe I just need some time to think. Things are confusing in my head right now." Emily lowered her gaze to her plate, her shoulders slumping a bit. "I just want you to be happy, Jonathan. If there's something we can do to fix things, tell me. I'm willing to try." The sincerity in her words hit him unexpectedly. Jonathan knew Emily was being genuine, and the guilt he had been trying to avoid returned with full force. But even so, he couldn't get Lauren out of his mind. It was as if, now that he had experienced freedom with her, any attempt to go back to what he had with Emily was unbearable. As the weeks went by, Jonathan began spending even more money on Lauren. He bought expensive gifts, jewelry, and clothes. She seemed to love each new item she received, and Jonathan felt victorious with each satisfied smile she gave him. It was as if he was investing not just in the relationship, but in himself. As if by gifting Lauren, he was buying a new chance at happiness, a new life. They started going on discreet dates outside the house. Jonathan chose restaurants in less frequented neighborhoods and booked hotel rooms to spend nights together. Each meeting was a mix of excitement and risk, and Jonathan reveled in the adrenaline of living something so dangerous. Once, while they were having dinner at a hidden restaurant downtown, Lauren laughed at Jonathan's nervousness as he looked around, worried someone might see him. "Relax," she said, smiling and holding his hand across the table. "No one's watching us." "You don't know my life," he replied, laughing nervously. I have to be careful. Lauren shrugged. You worry too much, Jonathan. I like the thrill of it all, but you seem to be always tense. Let's just enjoy the moment. Jonathan tried to relax, but deep down he knew she was right. The relationship with Lauren, though it made him feel alive, was turning every aspect of his life into a war zone. He was torn between the desire for freedom and the growing guilt that came with it. Every time he came home and saw Emily, the guilt hit him like a blow, but he convinced himself that he deserved to be happy, even if it cost his wife's heart. However, as time passed, something changed in the way Jonathan looked at Lauren. The relationship, which once seemed exciting and dangerous, began to show signs of strain. Lauren seemed to be getting more demanding. She asked for more gifts, more expensive dinners, more of his time. Jonathan started to feel pressured, as if he was being pulled into a new prison, different from the one with Emily, but equally stifling. He tried to ignore this feeling, but Lauren's growing demand for attention and money was undeniable. We could go to Paris, she suggested one day while trying on a diamond necklace he had just given her. Paris? Jonathan frowned. That seems a bit too much right now. Lauren gave a carefree smile, but there was a gleam in her eyes that Jonathan couldn't decipher. Why not? You can. I want to experience everything with you, Jonathan. Jonathan forced a smile, but something inside him began to waver. He had traded a life of routine for one that now seemed to demand more than he was prepared to give. Jonathan began to realize that something was changing. What once seemed like a fairy tale, an exciting escape from the monotony of his life with Emily, was now turning into something he couldn't control. Lauren, who used to be a light and carefree presence, was becoming more demanding, and her expectations seemed to grow every day. It was a sunny morning when Jonathan came home early from work, hoping to find a quiet moment with Lauren. He knew Emily was still out, taking care of some household matters. When he entered the mansion, however, he found Lauren in the living room, flipping through catalogs of luxury clothes and jewelry with a frustrated expression on her face. "Jonathan, we need to talk," she said, not looking up from the catalog. He paused for a moment, feeling a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. "About what?" Lauren sighed, tossing the catalog aside. "I was thinking, we've been together for a while, right? I want to know where this is going." Jonathan frowned, sitting down on the sofa next to her. "What do you mean by where this is going?" "You know what I mean." Lauren looked him in the eye, serious. "I can't keep going like this forever, Jonathan. I'm dedicating myself to you, but you're tied to another life, another woman." Jonathan hadn't expected this conversation. Until then, they had avoided discussing the future, living each moment carefreely. But now, the reality of the situation seemed to be knocking at the door. He shifted on the sofa, trying to buy time to formulate a response. "Lauren, I don't know if now is the time to make drastic decisions." She interrupted him, her voice firm but still controlled. "But that's the thing. When will it be the right time? You said you wanted a different, more exciting life, but you're not doing anything to make that really happen. It feels like we're just stuck." Jonathan remained silent. The pressure on his back began to increase. He knew Lauren was right, but what she was asking for wasn't simple. Trading one life for another, destroying what was left of his marriage with Emily, wasn't a decision he could easily make, or at least that's what he tried to believe. Lauren looked at him, visibly frustrated. "I'm not asking for much, Jonathan. I just want to know where I fit into your life. Because honestly, I'm starting to wonder if you're really willing to put me first." Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Emily had arrived. Lauren quickly changed her expression, returning to her usual carefree demeanor. Jonathan felt his stomach churn as Emily entered the room, carrying shopping bags. "Hi, love. You're home early today," Emily said, smiling at him, not noticing the tension between him and Lauren. "Yes, I thought I could come home and take a break from the office for a few hours," Jonathan replied, forcing a smile. He exchanged a quick glance with Lauren, who had already gotten up and left the room without saying anything more. Emily approached, kissing him on the cheek before going to put away the groceries. Jonathan stayed on the sofa, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. For a moment, he almost wished everything could go back to normal. that he could forget Lauren, return to his life with Emily, and never worry about the lies he told every day. In the days that followed, things didn't get easier. Lauren continued to press him, subtly but consistently. She wanted more of Jonathan, more of his time, more of his commitment. Jonathan, on the other hand, began to realize what had once seemed impossible. He couldn't give Lauren everything she wanted without completely destroying his life. One evening, while they were dining at a discreet restaurant, far from the prying eyes of acquaintances, Lauren brought up the subject again. She was playing with a gold ring on her finger, twirling it absently. "You know we can't continue like this forever, right?" Jonathan, already exhausted from the conversation, sighed. "I know, Lauren, but we need to be realistic. Things aren't that simple." Lauren gave a short, humorless laugh. "Realistic? I'm being realistic, Jonathan. I want something concrete. I want to know that I'm important to you. And right now, it feels like I'm just a hidden part of your life." He looked at her, feeling the pressure build. "You are important to me, Lauren, more than you know. But I have a life. I have Grace. Grace." Lauren repeated his daughter's name as if tired of hearing him use it as an excuse. "It's always Grace or Emily. When will it be about us?" Jonathan had no answer. He began to realize that what Lauren was asking for went far beyond expensive dinners and secret meetings. She wanted a life with him. She wanted him to make a decision that would affect not only his life, but his family's life. He started to wonder if he had been fooling himself all along. Was Lauren the escape he needed, or had she become another kind of prison? As the days passed, Jonathan began to notice other things. Small actions of Lauren that he had previously ignored. She seemed more interested in expensive gifts, in luxurious trips, than in the simplicity of the moments they spent together. The spark of initial passion was starting to fade, and Jonathan wondered if she was really in love with him or with what he could offer. One time, while they were in the car, returning from dinner, Lauren mentioned, almost casually, "Have you thought more about Paris?" Jonathan, already exhausted by the weight of the situation, shook his head. "Lauren, we've talked about this. Now is not the time for trips. I'm trying to keep things under control." She rolled her eyes. "You always have an excuse." Jonathan looked at her, feeling a growing irritation. "I have responsibilities, Lauren. It's not as simple as you think." "Of course it is," she replied, disdainful. "You are just making things complicated." Frustration took over Jonathan. For the first time, he wondered if he had made a huge mistake by leaving his stable life behind for a relationship that now seemed more like a burden than a liberation. That night, as Jonathan lay in bed next to Emily, he stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. Doubt began to grow inside him. Maybe Lauren wasn't the answer to his problems. Maybe he was just trading one prison for another. What if he was making another mistake? Jonathan felt like he was caught in a web, and the more he tried to break free, the more entangled he became. Lauren had become a dominant presence in his life. What once seemed like an exciting adventure now felt like a carefully crafted trap. She knew exactly how to draw him in, and Jonathan, even aware of what was happening, couldn't pull away. One afternoon, while he was working in his home office, Lauren appeared with a serious expression on her face. She seemed agitated, but not the nervous kind. It was a controlled tension, as if she had planned exactly what she would say. Jonathan already felt the discomfort that would come with the conversation. "Jonathan, we need to talk about the future," Lauren began, crossing her arms as she stood in front of his desk. Jonathan looked up from his papers, feeling the weight of her words. He already knew what was coming next. "Lauren, I don't know if now is the best time for this. Now is the perfect time. Don't you see we're just dragging this out? I can't keep going like this, Jonathan. I want a life with you, and that means making concrete decisions." Jonathan felt his stomach churn. He knew she was right in part. But the weight of such a drastic decision was suffocating. He thought about Grace, thought about Emily, and knew that a separation would have much bigger consequences than Lauren seemed to understand. "I understand, Lauren," he said, trying to stay calm. "But things aren't as simple as you're making them out to be." She leaned slightly over the desk, her gaze fixed on him. "They're not simple because you don't want them to be. Because you're still tied to a life that no longer makes sense. I've made my choice, Jonathan. I'm waiting for you to make yours." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of her words. He knew this conversation was inevitable, but he still didn't feel ready to face the consequences. Every time he thought about leaving Emily and starting a new life with Lauren, something inside him hesitated. It was the growing doubt, the feeling that he might be walking into a monumental mistake. "I need time," he said, his voice low, trying to appease her. "Time?" Lauren laughed, but there was no humor in her laugh. "You're stalling, Jonathan. I'm not stupid. What do you really want? To stay stuck in this marriage forever while keeping me a secret? That's not a life." Jonathan felt cornered. He knew Lauren was growing impatient, but at that moment, something about her behavior bothered him. There was a growing aggressiveness and urgency he didn't fully understand. He began to suspect that Lauren wasn't being completely honest. Was she really as in love with him as she said, or was she after something more? Something he had so far refused to admit? In the following days, the tension only increased. Lauren started to demand more from Jonathan, not just emotionally, but also financially. With every meeting, she made new requests. She wanted a new car, more expensive jewelry, trips to luxurious destinations. Jonathan, who at first loved spoiling her, began to feel uncomfortable with what seemed to be a growing greed. One night, while they were at an expensive restaurant, Lauren brought up a new demand. "Jonathan, I've been thinking, we could make an investment together, to secure our future." "Investment?" Jonathan frowned, surprised by the suggestion. "Yes," she continued casually, while swirling her wine glass. "I thought we could buy a property in my name, something big, luxurious. That way, when you finally separate from Emily, we'll already have a home of our own." Jonathan felt a sense of discomfort settle in. A property in Lauren's name? What was once a secret romance was becoming an increasingly risky financial commitment. He had never considered anything like this. "I don't know, Lauren. This seems a bit hasty." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're going to keep stalling, aren't you? It's always the same excuse, Jonathan. I'm tired of waiting for you." The frustration in Lauren's voice hit him, but something in her tone made him suspicious. She was pressing more than usual, and the request to invest in a property made her seem more interested in his money than anything else. Jonathan began to wonder if their relationship had always been like this, or if he had been blind from the beginning. In the following days, Lauren didn't stop talking about the investment they should make together. She showed options for luxurious houses, insisted he sign documents and transfer money to a joint account she had created, and he ended up giving in and signing some papers. With each conversation, Jonathan's discomfort grew. He wanted to trust Lauren, but her pressure was beginning to suffocate him. One afternoon, he decided to investigate on his own. He went to his office and asked his trusted lawyer to review the documents Lauren had given him. As he did, a sense of panic began to grow inside him. The lawyer frowned as he analyzed the papers. "Jonathan, this looks very risky. If you sign this, you're basically transferring your house to her name." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Are you sure? What do you think you're doing? This could put you in a very complicated situation if things don't go as expected." Jonathan left the office with his head spinning. Lauren was trying to manipulate him to get hold of a large portion of his fortune. He wanted to believe she was just being practical, that she wanted to build a life together, but the evidence was clear. He was being drawn into a dangerous game, and no matter how much he wanted to stay in control, he was starting to realize he might be losing. That night, lying in bed next to Emily, Jonathan felt the weight of his choices. He stared at the ceiling, feeling a mix of anger and frustration. How had he let things get to this point? He was about to destroy everything he had, his marriage, his family, his fortune, for something that now seemed to be falling apart before his eyes. He turned to the side and looked at Emily, who was sleeping deeply. For a moment, he felt such an intense wave of guilt that he had to close his eyes to hold back the emotion. What had he done with his life? He was about to lose everything. And then, for the first time since it all began, Jonathan wondered if Lauren really loved him, or if, from the start, she was only interested in what he could offer. And for the first time, doubt turned into fear. Jonathan woke up that morning with a heavy feeling in his chest that he couldn't ignore. The sense of distrust towards Lauren was only growing, and despite his many attempts to justify her actions, he knew deep down that something was terribly wrong. He constantly thought about the documents the lawyer had reviewed and how Lauren pressured him to make increasingly risky decisions. But beyond that, there was something deeper, a nagging feeling that he never really knew her. The phone rang while he was getting dressed to leave. It was a message from Lauren. "We need to talk. Meet me at the hotel at 5 p.m. It's urgent." The tone of the message made his stomach turn. Urgent? What did she want now? He felt panic rising, but tried to calm himself. Something dark was approaching, something he couldn't avoid. Jonathan knew the meeting at the hotel would be decisive, for him and, perhaps, for the rest of his life. Throughout the day, Jonathan tried to focus on work, but his mind was distant, stuck in suppositions and doubts. Time passed slowly until finally the hour came. He got into the car and drove to the hotel, his heart beating faster with every mile. The nervousness he felt wasn't normal. He knew he was about to discover something that would change everything. Upon arriving, he entered the silent lobby and went up to the room Lauren had reserved. When the door opened, there she was, as always, beautiful and carefree, but something in her smile seemed different. There wasn't the warmth he was used to seeing, just a calculated calm, as if she were in control of the situation and he was just a pawn in her game. "Hi," he said, trying to hide his anxiety. "Hi," she replied, walking towards him and sitting on the bed. Jonathan sat in a chair near her, not knowing exactly what to expect. "So, what's so urgent?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. Lauren took a deep breath, as if preparing for something. "Jonathan, I'm tired of waiting. I want an answer. What are you going to do about us?" Jonathan felt his heart race. There it was again, the pressure, the ultimatum. He had already been pushed to the limit, and now she wanted a final decision. "Lauren, I've already said I need more time." She narrowed her eyes, and in that moment, something changed. Her look was no longer of frustration, but of coldness. "Time?" She laughed, but the laugh was hollow, lifeless. "Do you think you can stall me forever?" "I'm not stalling you," he replied, starting to feel the anger rise. "But you're demanding more than I can offer right now. I have a daughter, a life. Things aren't that simple." Lauren crossed her arms, her eyes hard. "Yes, of course. Always Grace, always Emily. And what am I, Jonathan? Just a temporary fling? Because that's what it feels like to me." He was silent for a moment, trying to find the right words. "No, Lauren, of course not." But before he could continue, Lauren abruptly stood up, grabbing her purse from the bed and taking out a thick envelope. She threw the envelope on the table in front of him. "I wanted to give you a chance to be honest, Jonathan. But it seems you were never going to truly choose me." Jonathan looked at the envelope, confused. "What's this?" "Open it and see for yourself," she said, crossing her arms. With trembling hands, Jonathan opened the envelope and pulled out the papers inside. His eyes scanned the lines of text, and as he read, his heart sank. They were bank statements, transfers of large sums of money to accounts he didn't recognize, documents with a signature, authorizing the sale of properties and the transfer of funds. And the most devastating of all, papers proving that Lauren, along with a man named David, had withdrawn a large part of his fortune. Jonathan looked at her, stunned. What is this? How did you?" Lauren smiled, but it was a cruel smile without warmth. "You didn't think I was with you for love, did you? Oh, Jonathan, you're smart, but so easy to manipulate. From the beginning, David and I planned everything. You were just a means to an end." Her words hit him like a punch to the stomach. Everything started to make sense. The pressures, the gifts, the trips, the documents he signed without reading carefully. He had been deceived all along. "David? Who is David?" "David is the man I'm really with. And now we're ready to leave, with everything you so generously gave us." Jonathan felt the world spinning around him. He stood up from the chair, the document still in his hands, but the words wouldn't come out of his mouth. You stole everything. You used me." Lauren looked at him without a hint of remorse. "It was too easy. You were so desperate for a way out of your mediocre life that you didn't even notice. All it took was a smile and a few empty promises for you to fall. And now, you have nothing left." Jonathan was paralyzed, his mind trying to process what had just happened. He had lost everything: his fortune, his reputation, his dignity. The woman he had left his life for was running away with another man, taking everything he had. "How could you do this?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper, unable to believe he'd been so naive. Lauren picked up her bag and smiled again, without a trace of compassion. "You should have paid more attention, Jonathan. Now it's too late." And with that, she turned and walked out the door, leaving Jonathan alone in the hotel room, with the bitter realization that he had been betrayed in the cruelest way possible. He looked at the documents in his hands, knowing that his life as he knew it was over. Jonathan stood in the hotel room for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. His thoughts raced back and forth, but always returned to the same painful reality. He had been brutally deceived. Lauren, the woman for whom he had sacrificed everything, had not only betrayed him, but had stolen what remained of his dignity and fortune. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest, and the despair grew with each passing second. He looked at the envelope containing the documents and bank statements. Each page seemed crueler than the last. Everything he had built throughout his life, the money, the properties, the stocks, was now in someone else's hands. David, Lauren's accomplice, a man he had never met, now controlled most of his wealth. Jonathan sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands over his face, trying to contain the avalanche of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. How had he been so blind? He, a man so calculating, who always planned everything, had been so easily manipulated by a woman who now seemed more of a stranger than someone he once believed he loved. Shame consumed him. He had traded everything, his wife, his daughter, his stable life, for an illusion. Jonathan remembered the times Emily had tried to reconnect with him, her sincere attempts to save their marriage, while he was lost in Lauren's empty promises. Now, everything had fallen apart, and he had nothing left. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Hesitantly, he took it out and saw several messages from Emily. "Jonathan, where are you? We need to talk. Is something wrong? Please answer me." Jonathan stared at the screen but couldn't respond. What could he say? How could he face Emily now, knowing what he had done? He had destroyed their marriage for nothing. Lauren had left, taking not only his money but also his trust, but his ability to believe in anything. Slowly, Jonathan left the hotel and drove home, what felt like an endless journey. Each mile covered only made the pit in his stomach grow deeper. When he finally arrived, he parked the car in front of the mansion but couldn't get out immediately. He sat there, staring at the front door, knowing he would have to face Emily. For the first time since it all began, Jonathan felt completely powerless. When he finally entered the house, the silence was almost unbearable. Emily was sitting in the living room, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed on some distant point. When she heard the door open, she looked up and her expression softened with relief. But her face soon changed as she noticed Jonathan's state. He looked pale and much older than he had just hours before. "Jonathan," she began, her voice soft but full of concern. "What's going on?" He couldn't look her in the eyes. He felt destroyed, a shadow of the man he once was. I did something terrible, Emily." She frowned, moving closer to him. "What do you mean? You're scaring me." Jonathan finally met her gaze, his eyes full of regret. "I made a mistake. I betrayed you, Emily, and now I've lost everything." The shock on Emily's face was palpable. She stepped back as if his words had struck her physically. "What are you saying, Jonathan? How did you lose everything?" Jonathan took a deep breath, feeling the tears burn in his eyes. He had never felt so vulnerable. "I traded you for another woman, the nanny, Lauren, and now she's gone with all the money. She deceived me. I was a fool." Emily stood silent for a few seconds, absorbing his confession. Her face shifted from disbelief to hurt, then to a rage Jonathan had never seen before. "You destroyed our family for her?" Her voice was low but full of a pain that hit him like a knife. "I'm so sorry," was all Jonathan could say. The words felt insignificant in the face of what he had done. Emily shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "You betrayed everything we built for an illusion." She turned away, unable to continue looking at him. Jonathan felt the crushing guilt grow in his chest, but he knew there was no going back. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. The following days were a blur. News of Jonathan Walker's bankruptcy spread quickly. The fortune he had meticulously built over the years vanished in a series of fraudulent transactions. Friends, colleagues, and even the press wanted answers. How had one of Los Angeles' most successful businessmen fallen so quickly? But Jonathan no longer had the strength to care about what others thought. His company, unable to sustain the losses, began to collapse. Investor confidence disappeared almost as quickly as his fortune. He desperately tried to save what was left, but it was too late. Lauren's scam had been precise and devastating. She and David had vanished, leaving Jonathan to face the ruins alone. The doors of his life began to close one by one. Emily, though deeply hurt, still tried to maintain stability for Grace. But Jonathan knew their marriage was over. The trust between them had been irreparably broken. One night, while wandering through the empty house, Jonathan stopped in front of a mirror and almost didn't recognize the man he saw. Where was Jonathan Walker, who believed he controlled his own destiny? The man who thought he could have it all, money, power, and any woman he wanted? He had been replaced by someone who couldn't even look himself in the eye. He thought about Grace, the daughter he had neglected while he was involved with Lauren. How could he explain to her one day why his life fell apart? How could he face his daughter knowing he had thrown away everything that mattered most? Jonathan collapsed on the living room floor, feeling the crushing weight of his choices. He knew it was his own greed, his own ego, that had led to his downfall. Lauren was just the catalyst. Jonathan Walker's fall had begun long before she entered his life. It started the moment he believed he could have everything without considering what he might lose in the process. Jonathan woke up that morning with a deep sense of emptiness. Days passed, but nothing felt real. He wandered through the large, silent house, now emptier than ever. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own thoughts, which echoed like an unrelenting hammer, constantly reminding him of what he had done. Emily had left the house a few days ago. After his confession, she decided she could no longer live with a man who had betrayed her so cruelly. She didn't argue or make a scene. She just packed her things and Grace's and left. Jonathan didn't blame her. In fact, he could barely face her as she packed. The look of disappointment in her eyes was worse than anything he could have imagined. Grace, still too young to understand everything, innocently asked why they were leaving. Jonathan overheard the conversation from upstairs, feeling the weight of guilt crush his chest. Emily answered calmly and lovingly, trying to hide her own pain. But Jonathan knew the child would soon feel her father's absence. At that moment, he realized he had lost not only the woman who had supported him for so many years, but also the daughter he loved and neglected while he got entangled in the chaos he had created. The nights he ignored Emily's attempts to revive their marriage, the time he spent away from Grace, lost in the illusion with Lauren, all of it now struck him like a cruel punishment. The bankruptcy was swift and brutal. The name Jonathan Walker, once synonymous with success and power, was forever tarnished. The company, unable to withstand the blow, collapsed, and he lost not only the trust of his investors, but also any respect he had earned over the years. The press treated his downfall as a scandal, a moral lesson about greed, about what happens when a man is consumed by an insatiable desire for more. Jonathan tried to maintain the little dignity he had left, but he knew there was no escaping the public eye. The once powerful magnate was now an example of what not to do. He avoided leaving the house, and when he did, he felt the reproachful and curious gazes of people. Everyone wanted to know how he had fallen so quickly, how someone who had everything now had nothing. He received letters from lawyers, creditors, former business associates, and even old friends, all demanding answers or financial compensation. But Jonathan knew he had nothing left to offer. Everything he had was drained by Lauren, and what remained didn't cover even a fraction of the debts he had incurred. Jonathan sank into solitude, spending his days drinking in silence, recalling the moments that led him to this point. He wondered how he could have been so blind. Lauren had manipulated him from the start, playing on his insecurities and vanity, but he knew deep down that it was he who allowed it to happen. He wanted to be deceived. He wanted to believe he could escape the life he had built and start over with someone who, now he clearly saw, never truly loved him. There was a morning, weeks after Lauren's final blow, when he thought about calling Emily. He picked up the phone several times but could never press the button to call. What could he say to her? How could he ask for forgiveness for something so unforgivable? He knew that even if she forgave him, there was no going back. Their relationship was dead, and he had killed it. Instead, Jonathan sifted through his memories, seeking some sense in the chaos his life had become. He remembered the early conversations with Lauren, the smiles, the flirtations, and how he let himself get drawn in. He thought about how carefree and young he felt around her, an illusion that now seemed ridiculous and tragic. She used him, and he allowed it. Worse, he used himself, used the relationship to deceive himself, to avoid facing the painful truths about his life and his own shortcomings. Months passed, and Jonathan was unrecognizable. The confident and successful man was gone, replaced by someone who barely left the house and lived with regret as his constant companion. The house, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison, full of memories of what he had destroyed. One day, he received an unexpected visit. It was Emily. Jonathan saw her standing at the door, and for a brief moment, he felt a faint hope, as if she was there to offer some chance of redemption. But her expression was different. There was no hatred or anger, just a resigned sadness. "We need to talk about Grace," she said without preamble. Jonathan nodded, letting her in. They sat on the same couch where years ago, so many conversations about the future had taken place. But now their future no longer existed. Emily talked about what would be best for Grace, suggesting he see her on weekends, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the child. Jonathan agreed to everything, knowing that anything he said would be futile. When the conversation ended, Emily stood to leave. Jonathan, his voice low and hesitant, finally asked the question that had been on his mind since she arrived. "Do you forgive me?" She paused, her back to him. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "I don't know if I can ever forgive what you did, but Grace needs a father, and I'll do what's best for her." Jonathan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Emily left without looking back, and he knew that chapter of his life was definitively closed. Jonathan spent the rest of his days in silence, far from the spotlight that once illuminated his every move. He had lost his fortune, his family, and the future he once believed he could control. Now, all that remained was a vague attempt to move forward, even though life would never be the same. And Lauren? He never heard from her or David again. It was as if they had vanished from the map, taking the millions and the life Jonathan had sacrificed. She had won, and he, tragically, was the only one to blame for allowing it to happen. Do you think Emily should have given Jonathan a second chance? Share your opinion in the comments. We really want to know what you think. Your participation is very important to us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Thank you for watching.